Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 145. May I begin with Yehavchu Yom Meil L'Sosin L'Simcha L'Moedim Tevim. We're coming from Asara Teves, one of the Tzemes, one of the fasts, one of the four mentioned in Tanakh. And as the Rambam concludes in the laws of Tainis, and the Rebbe would so often cite, that the whole purpose and the ultimate objective of all these fasts is that Yehavchu, they will be transformed to days of celebration and joy and holidays. So it's not just enough that we eliminate the source of our pain and the source of suffering and the source of things that caused us anguish. In this case, the surrounding and the besieging of Yerushalayim, which was followed afterwards by the breaching of the wall and followed by ultimately, tragically, the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the first and the second. So it's not just enough to erase that, but it's actually critical to transform it. Yehavchu, as the Navi says in Zechariah and other psukim, Yehavchu Yom Meilu, which is such an essential message in Judaism in general, Chassidus particularly, and of course Chassidus applied in that spirit, which is all about transformation, even of negative things in our lives, are never just enough to erase and get back to the drawing board, to back to step one, back to the beginning. We have to always transform everything, even things that seem negative or are actually negative, and to the surface, to the naked eye on the surface level, to something positive. So there we have right there a lesson in itself. But speaking about Asara Teves, being that it's particularly that day, let's talk a moment about its particular message and relevance and significance to our times and to our lives. So number one is the first time the Rebbe spoke Asara Teves was in Tov Lamed Ches. Tov Lamed Ches was 1978, the beginning of 78 or the end of 77, depending on what the schedule, the calendar was then. And that was the year after the Rebbe had the heart attack. So as we've spoken many times, the Rebbe himself was a living example of the Yehavchu. He didn't just get rid of his illness and the heart attack, but transformed it to be a catalyst and a springboard for even more growth. And one of the elements of growth was actually speaking, as the Rebbe said, renewing the old custom, what was called Divrei Kvushin, that the rabbi or the leader of the community would speak words of Asarah and inspiration in an Asarah, which is a fast day. So though it was caused by a sad event, but nevertheless it was used, and the Rebbe renewed this custom to speak in words that would inspire and elicit from people a stronger commitment to Torah and mitzvahs and to tshuva and to all that Yiddishkeit represents in illuminating this world with a divine light. That was the first time the Rebbe spoke. And one of the things he said then was very interesting. He quoted from the Avud Raham. Avud Raham was a middle-aged halachist, and who writes, based on the fact that Asara Teves, it says, Be'etzem hayem hazeh, that we learn Be'etzem, where else does it say Be'etzem hayem hazeh gzeir shaveh? By Yom Kippur. That Asara Teves has the same power of Yom Kippur. We learn from Yom Kippur to what? To be doiche Shabbos. That if Asara Teves would come out on Shabbos, it doesn't, as I'll speak about in a moment, but if it did, we actually fast on Shabbos, just like Yom Kippur, we fast on Shabbos. Which is one of the reasons actually that they made sure that it should never come out on Shabbos. So Asara Teves in our day and age never comes out on a Shabbos. Today it's a Sunday, other days of the week, but never Shabbos. But should it come out on Shabbos, it would be Deicha Shabbos, which is somewhat strange. Tisha B'Av, which is the actual destruction of the temple, and it's actually a 24-hour fast, which begins the night before, like Yom Kippur, does not Deicha Shabbos. If Yom Kippur, if Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos, we fast on Sunday, with all the halachas that I believe last year was that way, and other times where we push off, and all the different laws of how we enter from Shabbos into Tisha B'Av. Asara Teves, which was just the besieging of Yerushalayim, V'samach Melech Bovel, where he encamped and surrounded and encircled the city, is more powerful than Tisha B'Av. And one of the explanations that Rebbe gives is, yes, in one way it is. Because when in Judaism, we don't look at the symptoms, we look at the cause. The result of the sins, result of the sinas chinam, or the other causes that caused the destruction of the temple, the result was ultimately the destruction. But it didn't begin with the destruction. It began with events that happened earlier. And the first thing that happened was that if Nebuchadnezzar would not have surrounded Jerusalem, we would never have the breaching of the wall, you'd never have the destruction of the temple. What is that significant? So therefore, we recognize that it all began when he surrounded Yerushalayim. Okay, that's the technical side. So really, Tisha B'Av is essentially an outgrowth and a result of the encampment, the result of Nebuchadnezzar attacking Yerushalayim, which on Asara B'Teves was the first key element because he surrounded the city. Spiritually speaking, and its personal relevance to us, what is so significant about surrounding a city? Well, what is the role of a wall around the city? A wall around the city is meant to be a protection. You have gates in the wall. Anyone who travels to Yerushalayim today knows there's a Shar Yafa, there's different gates to the wall. But then there's also the wall itself. It's meant to protect. In Avedis Hashem, in our personal work, there's a thing called Asuyus Siyog L'Teira. The Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, create a fence for Teira. Why do you need a fence? Because often there are challenges to our commitment, and before the challenge attacks us directly, what you do is you create defense lines, like you see in the army. You don't wait till they attack you and then you defend yourself. You'll see around the king's palace there are walls, and there's often a river, and there's all kinds of ways you can't get in. Because a wise person doesn't wait for the attack. A wise person creates preventive measures to make sure that the attack should not even come to you in the first place. And you should have many different defense lines before it even comes. And the same thing is in spiritual work of a person. A healthy person doesn't just is not just healthy, but they have all kinds of defense lines. Look at our human body, how it's created. Even though we have internal organs, which is the brain, the mind, we have our heart, we have our lungs, we have our internal organs, yet those organs are encased inside of a body. And the body is surrounded by layers of skin, until the outer layer of skin. And that is covered by hair. And anyone who knows the basics of medicine knows all these are actually forces of like a wall around the city, Iktana Zehaguf, the city, which is the body, which is the person, that protects us. If we didn't have those outer layers, God forbid, bacteria, infections, and other toxins could enter and penetrate. So much is captured by the hair, the skin. That's why, God forbid, when there's surgery and you have to open up a body to perform surgery, how sterilized that environment has to be, because they're very vulnerable and very fragile. A body encased in the internal organs encased inside the body, encased inside the skeleton, including, as I said, the outer layers of the flesh, including our fat and our skin and our hair and so on, is essentially the equivalent of the city around, the wall around the city. In the case of Yerushalayim, Yirah Kodesh, the wall around the city to protect Yerushalayim, Yirah Shalom. Yerushalayim comes to the two words, Yirah Shalom, complete awe, a state of perfect awe of the divine. So we need a wall to surround it from a world that is not a perfect world. Before Chet Tzadas, before the Adam and Eve were in the garden, before they ate from the tree, it was a world that was Ikar Shechina B'Tachtein Meisa, and the Shechina was revealed. It was a world aligned with its creator and his plan. But once there became that concealment, that the world can become, as in a sense, creates a dichotomy or a dissonance between what we do and who we are, between our outer behavior, our outer world, with its deeper purpose. There you need siyogim, you need walls that protect the inner core. Like what klipa is called klipa, as the Shalah says, a klipa means a shell. A klipa, kodmila pri, the shell to protect the fruit within. Children, innocent children, need the protection, first in the 9 months in their mother's womb, and then the protection of their parents and of a nurturing, healthy environment, the home, the hearth, that's meant to be a protection. So when they go out to the world, they have those layers of protection. Now, what happens when that outside wall is encircled, is besieged? That's when the beginning of the problems start. And that's Asara B'Teves. So we don't wait for the walls to be breached. We don't wait for the temple to be destroyed. We immediately react as soon as we see that wall, the outer wall, the siyogim, the different chumras, the different preventive measures that the rabbonim, that the sages and the rabbonim and the tanoim and amiroim and through the generations established. Those things, as soon as we see that being attacked, that's when you know you have to mobilize and protect. So Asara B'Teves Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh has that power that even if it's Shabbos, We don't push it off for a day. We immediately address it. Which also tells us that when Asara Teves is transformed into a positive thing, it also has that positive element that will also be a greater transformation than other fasts. Because it has such power in the negative, therefore it has also power of a samach melech bovel, as the Rebbe explains in those talks in Tov Shalom et Ches. Samach also means samach from the word smuchim, from the word support. We say semach neflim, when it was the support that we give each other. So samach is an interesting word. It could be used in the negative that he besieged the city, but it could also be used that he supported the city, which will be the end when Nebuchadnezzar, like it says in the Yalkut Shmeni, that Rebbe also quotes often, is that in the month of Av, that the Yove Aryeh, that the lion came and destroyed the Aryeh, which is the base of meaning. In the month of Aryeh, which is Av, the lion, which is Hashem, Aryeh Yishag Mila Yira, will build the Aryeh, the base of Migdash, in the month of Aryeh, which is Av. So basically, it's a transformation that from a besieging becomes a support. As I said before, not just we eliminate the past, the negative, but we also transform it, that it becomes a Shamash Gadol, it becomes a great support of holiness, and the world is transformed to a divine home. That's Asara Teves and his personal lesson, which basically simply means this, that if you want to live a healthy life, a psychologically healthy and emotional life, and a personal life, is critical not just to protect, not just to preserve your personal inner focus, but also to create a right environment, a protective environment for ourselves, for our families, for our children, and be very vigilant when that environment is in some way compromised. You don't need to wait till the core is compromised. And the same is true in marriage. The same is true in so many areas. The laws that the Torah establishes, Hilchos Yichud or other laws, are all meant to protect the beautiful core within, because we live in a world that the more protection you have, the better. This doesn't mean to be alarmist, and it doesn't mean to be paranoid. It means simply the proper thing. You need walls. Walls are not meant to keep things out. Walls are meant to protect things. The walls, why we didn't go into the Holy of Holies, not because there was a problem, but it was because the Holy of Holies is so holy, you don't want to in any way contaminate it with the toxins and pollution of this material world. So pure environments need those protective elements, and we have to be very vigilant around that. And if there's any type of compromise, immediately respond, not wait till things get out of hand, which of course is the essence of all therapy, which is nip it in the bud. Don't wait till it becomes a monster. Don't wait till the infection begins to fester because you've ignored it. You deal with it immediately with the right interventions, and you can prevent many, many things. How many problems could be prevented if we nipped it in the Asara Teves core when we first saw the first besieging, the first compromise? Another point I want to add is Asara Teves and Hey Teves. Hey Teves, of course, we spoke about last week, which is the Dan Notzach, as the Rebbe said, the Sforim of the Sforim are Notzach, were victorious, which we discussed was essentially the eternity of Torah, the eternity of Chassidus, the perpetuation of it in an eternal way, because it's not belongs to any human being that is subject to the mortal laws of life and nature, but rather something that lives on and on. So is there a connection between Hey Teves and Asara Teves? Absolutely. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis speaks about two opinions. We're all familiar with Rabbi Akiva's opinion, because that's the halacha that the fast is on the 10th of Teves, the day when, as I mentioned, Nebuchadnezzar Samach Melech Bavel, the Babylonian king, surrounded the Yerushalayim. But Rabbi Akiva, that's Rabbi Akiva says that. Rashbi comes and says no, that the fast should be actually on the 5th of Teves, Hey Teves. Why? Because Hey Teves, as the Pasuk says, Lamed Gimel Chaf Aleph 33:21 in the book of Ezekiel, Yecheskel, that's the day when the Polit, the refugee who came from the destroyed city of Jerusalem, came to Babylon, and that's when he notified Yecheskel and those Jews that were living in the Geula already, who were exiled 11, 12 years earlier, about the destruction of the temple. And because the Psura came, that negative information, we should fast then, which would then also be an orderly way. First comes Shavasar B'Tammuz, the breaching of the wall, then comes the destruction of the temple, then comes the sad notification to Yecheskel, who then began to prophesy and talk about the reasons for it and how we can obviously redeem and do tshuva. So, of course, the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, which is why Asara Teves is Asara Teves. But you see a connection between the two. But here's the question then. We know Hey Teves today was a different psura. It was the psura, the news that came that the court case was won, and which was essentially, as I said, established in federal court and a secular court, that a Rebbe belongs to Chassidim, that a Rebbe, that his Rebbe, his Sfarim, his Torah belongs to Chassidim, which means it's an eternal thing and not some subject to the inheritance laws of any private property or any private citizen. And the psura that's Hey Teves to Yecheskel was actually a very negative psura. The Rebbe actually has a footnote in a letter dated Hey Teves Tavshin Lamed Vav, where he talks about things to do for Israel on the Asara B'Teves of that year, and says, why was it pushed off from Av till Teves? Because bad news you don't want to bring quickly. So it was pushed off until there was no choice, because Yecheskel was the prophet, had to know about it and had to prophesy and talk about it. So seemingly these two Teves are very different psuras. One is a very good news about eternity of Yiddishkeit, Lo Yichfu Neder Le'elam, as the Rebbe Rashab says about Malchus Beis David and about the Rabbeim, that the flame will never be extinguished. That's Hey Teves. On the other hand, the psura, the news that came to Yecheskel, was about the destruction. The answer is quite obvious. The Hey Teves in our times, 30 years ago, in a way is a tikkun for the Hey Teves there, because the Churban Beis HaMikdash is exactly that the nitzchius of Elokus, v'shachanti b'seichem, was unfortunately compromised. And the Beis HaMikdash physically was destroyed. So the Ruchnius was separated from the Gashmis. The physical Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, even though there's a Beis HaMikdash L'mayla. Hey Teves in Tov Mem Zayin 30 years ago was the exact opposite. That the Rebbe lives, his Torah lives, Chassidus lives, and the Beis HaMikdash in that sense is a nitzchi, even in this world, in this physical world, through his Torah, because the tzaddik, the Rebbe, gives his life a non-nafshik sovis yovis in the Torah that he writes and teaches and learns. As the Alter Rebbe says, that his life is not flesh, chaim psarim, it's life of chaim ruchnim, spiritual life, ava v'yira and amunah, love and awe and faith. And that lives on. So in a way, that is actually the conclusion of the psura then. That was the psura of destruction, but we just spoke earlier, Yehovchi Yom HaMeil, the whole purpose is transformation, not to remain destruction, God forbid. It's not, tzimtzum is hepech hakavona, hepech harotzen. The concealment is not the intention. The intention is the gilui that ultimately it leads to. Additionally, when you look actually in the Vur there in chapter 33, in Cheskel, you'll see that he talks about at the end, after he talks about all the reasons, the iniquities and the causes for it, he says, but you will know, Israel will know that there is a Navi among you. So in a sense, despite all this darkness and the concealment, there's a Navi among us. There's a Nitzchias among us. And that's the lesson that we need to learn about all of this, of how it perpetuates and exists today. Obviously, the positive side of it all, the Hey Yud Teves connection. Now, let's move with that into a follow-up. I've been talking about the greatest challenges facing our community today. So I want to conclude with today with the other list of the final things that others have pointed out. With, of course, the kavanah, exactly like I just spoke about Hey Teves, not to talk about challenges and difficulties, but only to illuminate. As they say, Shailas Chacham Chetzi Tshuva, the question of a wise person is half an answer. And the Yediyas HaMachla is Chetzi B'Refuah. And the awareness of a problem is half the cure. So being able to identify the challenges is in order to Yehovchu, to transform them into something positive and healing. So I went through, and I'll quickly go through so far 9 of the top issues that you identified. And they were the lack of unity and vision and leadership, issues regarding our education system, gap between shluchim and non-shluchim, and general lack of equality, the role of women, Yiras Shamayim that we need to work on. Those are the, I count, I missed, I'm sorry. Internet, smartphones, and all the challenges that poses. Mashiach, Tznius, inadequacy and mashpiyim, the role of woman, and Yiras Shamayim. Those are the 9 that I've so far spelled out. Here's a few more, briefly. Kabbalah Sel isn't emphasized and practiced enough. Judgmentalism in this community is handicapping. Teves Noshim for men and their challenges in that regard, which is essentially sexual challenges. Another one, we lost our ability to stay focused on task. The emphasis and pressure to be learned and educated. Too much exposure to the secular world. Overall ignorance. We're not living with Mashiach, really. And one person wrote to me, which is not included on this list, and said that you have to get down to the root of it all, and he suggests that the root of it all is that we're becoming assimilated. I guess it's similar, too much exposure to the secular world. And the whole point of Chassidus and the Rebbe was to keep us above water, more than above water, to keep the standard high, to keep our sights to the highest possible level of reaching Geula Mashiach. And when that becomes weakened, obviously all other things start, unfortunately, being also compromised. Somewhat like the Asara Teves, getting to the root of it, which of course we will discuss. What is there a root to all of this? But the fact of the matter is, as we all know, even in physical medicine, you can't just deal always with the root. You have to deal with symptoms, short-term solutions, band-aids, and stop the bleeding, while you're also working on the longer term, which can be the preventive and get to the root of it all. So we will address it. If you still want to submit your thoughts on the matter, both whether about these issues or suggestions, actually, please do so at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. So this is essentially really the whole driving engine and driving force behind this series. We're doing 145 weeks of this program. Was essentially, as I said at the outset of this episode 145, is using Chassidus to get to the root or to the symptoms of the challenges of our time. That's what it's about. To get to the Asara B'Teves root. What are the causes? Where should we be more vigilant? How do we prevent things from happening? And of course, how to deal with things once they're already in a situation that needs healing. That's the key element of it all. So this is why we're focusing on these ideas. And obviously, as I've said many, many times, all of you are part of this. We're partners in this. So it's not just, I'm asking you not just as an optional thing, please see it as an obligation to share. Share your thoughts, share your insights, share the problem as you may see it, or share a solution. Because I really believe that if we put our heads together and our hearts together, and we want to do what the Rebbe wants, what Chassidus wants, we can find solutions. They may not be simple, they may not be one size fits all, but nevertheless, our job is to be not part of the problem, but become part of the solution. So I invite you all into this, I could say, sacred work, which is really dealing with the challenges of our time. For the last few moments, we're still in Golus, and do what we have to do as we were charged with what we have to do everything we can to bring the Geula, which of course means dealing also with all the challenges within us, and all the different ways to do so. So please participate in this in any way possible, and I will do my part to try to consolidate, gather it together, and suggest what Chassidus, the Rebbeim, the Rebbe has to offer us in this regard. Okay. With that, let us move to a few questions and some follow-ups. So here's the question. Can the Chassidic approach of loving every Jew unconditionally create a laxity of standards? So a person writes, a few people wrote about this different times, but just we've gathered them together. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. Firstly, thanks for your weekly episodes. I enjoy watching them, usually as I'm cooking for Shabbos. And I enjoy the emes that shines through your Chel D'Mamadaka approach that simply speaks the emes without harsh, judgmental, or cold drama, or backbending political correctness. Thank you. That being said, I am including my name and email for you to respond to my question, but not to be shared publicly. I'd appreciate if you could take the time from your busy schedule to respond, as I am taking the time to write this all in response to your request for the top issue facing the Lubavitch community. Regarding that, my high school student brought up this issue in a private conversation, and I must admit she has some point. She attended non-Lubavitch schools and camps, so she has a firm basis for her statements. Does the acceptance of everyone lend itself to developing a lax attitude to Yiddishkeit? It seems to me that some have the fundamentals in place, but don't have the same level of Yiras Shamayim and staunch commitment to action that other communities have. We're taught that Hashem loves us unconditionally, and our neshama can never be tainted by the things we do. This many times can justify the lack of commitment in our youth. It's true that the work Chassidus demands is internal, authentic, and self-motivated, and therefore, when done properly, is invaluable. But at the end of the day, Jews who may be performing mitzvahs because of external factors, like community pressure, fear of Gehenna, and the like, has a basic Kabbalah Seil that perhaps the Chassidic approach may be missing. Is the Chabad method really worth it if many lacking in commitment to the strict commitment to the details? Is a thorough understanding of the neshama, the world, and our relationship with Hashem that Chassidus provides enough of a foundation for a devoted Torah life? The Chassidus approach of loving every Jew unconditionally have its drawbacks. Now, the letter goes on, it's a longer letter, but this is the gist of it. You could also add, as the person does add, the focus on action on helping others, the focus on trying to bring secular people back to Yiddishkeit, does it sometimes water down or dilute the commitment to the Torah in its full glory and so on? So I read the question in a way uncensored, even though I didn't read all the details, because I'm assuming many people have this question and may be afraid to ask it. There's definitely people from other communities that have this question, and I will answer with the same candidness as the questioner wrote. First and foremost, Chassidus, the Rabbeim, are not an alternative to Torah mitzvahs. They are an extension of Torah mitzvahs. Moshe Rabbeinu received Torah b'Sinai, including everything that Chassidus teaches, everything Kabbalah teaches, everything Torah Shebal Peh teaches, everything Torah Shebiksav, of course, teaches. Torah b'Pirusha Nitna, the Torah was given with its explanation. So the whole Torah Shebal Peh, though technically it was written down by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, more than 1,000 years after the Har Sinai Matan Torah, because the time had come to write it down. Till then, they were studying it Bal Peh. So the same, but it was all given at Har Sinai. The same as all the generations of Torah, including Rishenim and Achreinim, Nigla, Pnimis, and everything. All is part of one Torah, and what part of one Torah meaning given in order for a person to strengthen their commitment to Yiddishkeit, and commitment to God, and their commitment to the whole thing with every detail. Why am I saying it in that context? Because any laxity anyone has is their own personal thing. There are many people lax, and it's an individual thing, and I would not believe, and I want to make it very clear that, in a way, I don't say Lashon Hara on the community, the Chabad community. If you want to look with a microscope, even without a microscope, you'll find laxity everywhere. So no one has a monopoly on laxity. Every one of us has Bechira, free will. We have a Nefesh Elikis, a Nefesh Abamis, a divine soul and an animal soul, as the Alter Rebbe elaborates. And therefore, and most people are in the category of Rosh V'Teveh who have maybe done one sin in their life. So I'm not here to judge, but the fact of the matter is, we all have our challenges. Some people are very strong in some areas in Yiddishkeit, and some area people have in that particular area there's a weakness. That's the Aved that we were sent to this world to know. It's nothing to be frightened of. That's exactly the purpose. So to suggest that Torah, Chassidus, and the Rabbeim created something that would create laxity, God forbid. The whole Chassidus is Lefnim Mishur Sadin. What is Lefnim Mishur Sadin? In addition to everything that you do Al Pi Din, with all the Digdur Kal Shel Divrei Sofrim, spelled out by the Alter Rebbe, as he wrote a whole Shulchan Aruch, and he himself lived it. Spelled out by all the Rabbeim as they lived it. In addition, there's Lefnim Mishur Sadin, Milsat Chassidus Chassid, that we add even more. We go even further than the law itself. So not only is it not lax, it's even more machmir in so many ways. Who introduced that most people put on today 2 pairs of tefillin? Who introduced certain chumras regarding shchita, or regarding kashrus, or regarding tzitzis, or regarding Pesach, and so on? I'm not saying this to pull any rank. I'm just saying that the whole Chassidus came to make a stronger commitment to Yiddishkeit. Now, is it possible, yes, that a person, as I said, has free will that they don't follow? Yes. Is it possible that sometimes someone who learns, like I heard from a Litvish friend of mine, he says, one thing I have to say, anyone Chabad, even a child, knows the purpose of existence, to make a dira b'tachtenim, a home for God in this world. By us, I can't say that everybody knows that. By us, we may know details. You know the foundations. So is there a possibility when you know the foundations, sometimes you are not necessarily so extreme? That's not because that's what Chassidus does. That's because people, nature of people again. But if you look at every sikh, literally, the Rebbe's words to Talmidim, the Rebbe's words to Shluchim, to everyone, to be Meisel B'Tim, Limadat Teir, and Kima Mitzvus B'Hidur, and Digdur Kal Shel Divrei Sofrim, V'Hagdomas Avedas HaTfilah, with Gemilas Chasodim. It's all saturated with the emphasis on it all. Now, you could say, why then is the Chabad system not suggesting everybody should go learn Kailul or learn Torah all their lives and do a little work? So there are the reasons, which is not really the place to go into. There's the reasons. First of all, the Rebbe and the Rabbeim understood the needs of our time. There's a matter of, yes, responsibility for others. Pekuach nefesh. Your brother and sister is sinking or a fire is burning. You can't just say, Anias nafshi etzalti, I protect myself. Secondly, the shlichus was never meant to be a compromise to Torah. It was meant to add. We know there's expression, tzedakah nasa liba mechi liba nasa mechi liba elef pamim kocha. Zakim elef pamim kocha. That through helping another person, your mind, your heart becomes zakim, become refined 1,000 times. And the Rebbe explains it's not an exaggeration. That in 1 hour you can learn and achieve and reach certain clarity that would take 1,000 hours regularly. The Gemara says, it's true there's another girsa, that Akashava brings it, which is not the place here, talk about mizbareches. There's an element that your Aveda becomes blessed. And Meir Einish Neim Havaya, that when you actually add and help other people reach Yiras Shamayim, it adds to your Yiras Shamayim. And when you explain to them an idea in Torah or Chassidus, you understand it better. As Alter Rebbe says in the introduction to Tanya, quoting the Pasuk Meir Einish, that both their eyes will be illuminated, both the teacher and the student. So, to suggest that there's something fundamental about Chassidus, God forbid, creates laxity. Is there challenges? We all have challenges. And yes, it is indeed true when you're active, involved with others, you could sometimes forget about yourself, which is something, that's why we focus on it. That's why we fabring, that's why we speak. So I'm glad you brought up the question. It is a very legitimate question. And however, there is also an answer. And the answer is that absolutely laxity in any type of digdukal, even detail, is not the Chassidish way. Do we all have our challenges and nisyonos in this? Absolutely. But who doesn't? Is it true that sometimes when you know the big picture, you sometimes forget the details? Yes, obviously. We always knew that the people who were more intelligent people, it was harder for them to focus on a detail, because details, they think it doesn't really matter, you do it this way, that way. But look at the Rebbe Rashab, one of the greatest minds in history, maybe the greatest, who knows in what level. At the same time, by him, a digduk kala, detail was unbelievable how every detail was calculated. You read Ashkafta the Rebbe, even when he was on his last days of his life, where he wasn't well, you see, even things he did in his sleep, the digduk, the refinement of every specific detail. We spoke before about Asara Teves. We don't just focus on the Beis Hamikdash, you focus also on the walls around it, making sure everything is protected. But we have our challenges, and yes, there are the challenges you describe, but that's why it's so important to talk about and address them properly. And let me finally say, you mentioned about Chitzenius, the idea of Yiras Einish, the fear of Gehenna, the fear of going to hell, the fear of punishment, even things that may be petty, like the fear of others, peer pressure or community pressure and culture. I've often talked about them as being not enough, because that really doesn't really create a Neved Hashem. That creates a person who may stay in line because of these fears. And how sustainable is that? And how much is he really that he or she going to really work on it when no one's watching or something like that, where they don't have that fear? That's why you need the Pnimius and Chassidus. But to suggest that only the Pnimius and Chassidus, and you never have Shalei L'Shma Bo L'Shma, and we have a concept of Yiras HaRetzua, Yiras HaEinish, it also exists. It's just the Chassidus focuses on what is the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is not just to put the Alter Rebbe's analogy, the ganef, the thief in prison, but to actually rehabilitate him that he shouldn't want to steal in the first place. But of course you need to have sometimes a short term. In school, you can't just rely on bringing the good out of people. There needs to be discipline, and there needs to be even at times certain enforcement of discipline, sheftim v'sheitrim. But the question is, what's the focus? The focus is always on the ava, on the love, yamin mikareves. Yamin mekareves, and we try to focus on them. And if anything has to be a little harsher, look at yourself, look at others with a good eye. So I hope I answered the question to some extent. And with that, let's move to the next question. How can a materialistic person change and become more godly? Chassidus teaches that even materialistic people who have a natural inclination to physical pleasures can develop a proper love for Hashem, to God, by meditating on the lowliness of the world. But if we're so conditioned to love Gashmias, the physical, the material, how can we possibly feel disgust to the very thing we love so much? Bottom line, can a materialistic person ever change and become more soulful? Please share some practical advice in this area. Another person writes, I just completed a Maimer in Torah on this week's Parsha, and this is where I got stuck. He writes there, a person who isn't a tzaddik should use the methods of Yain HaMeshaker, that means wine that intoxicates, to arouse love of God. The person should meditate, obviously he's talking about the spiritual version of it. The person should meditate on how extremely low the soul descended, meaning instead of loving God, the person loves materialism, and he should become extremely bitter and sad and cry out to God. Sadly, when thinking about my love for Gashmias, it feels so natural and it doesn't arouse bitterness or sadness. The only thought that comes to mind is to start feeling guilty and think that God can punish. Please teach me how to get to the level paraphrased above. Well, the mere fact that you're writing this and that you're pained that you can't fulfill what the Alter Rebbe is saying, to me, is already fulfilling what he's saying. Because at least you're pained by the fact that you're not pained. There's some people that are even immune to that, and they don't even ask such questions. So welcome to the club, if I can put it that way. We're all in this situation. We live in a materialistic world. We begin our life, chumizdik life. We're materialistic people. Let's not kid ourselves. Hashem made sure that when we enter this world, we forget the Torah that we learned in our mother's womb. That's why we need our Shavua, Mashbi and Eseti, Tzaddik V'al Tehi Rasha. Because we need the strength, Mashbi also from the word strength, and sated and fed and nourished with that power. Because life is difficult. Someone once went by the Rebbe by dollars and said he's doing in your futzah and chutza, going out, but he has sometimes something his Yetzer Hara starts talking to him while he's doing it. So the Rebbe said to him, what are you getting so excited? Everybody has a Yetzer Hara. He started pointing at him and said, this one. And the guy started looking around. The Rebbe said, you don't have to embarrass them. The point is, we're not celebrating our Yetzer Hara. That's not the point. The point is we have to recognize, especially when you learn Tanya, someone once told me, it validates that we have an animal soul. Not meant to validate so you should stay there. To recognize that's exactly what God wanted. Hashem wanted exactly that. You should ask such a question. That we are materialistic people, and we have the challenge, and even when we're told advice how to do it, we fight. And we resist that advice. And yet, there's still a voice inside of you that says, I feel sad, the fact that I cannot reach this level. That's what Chassidus teaches us. So we may not always know, be able to taste godliness, but we can figure out and say, what I have is not godly. That's a good beginning. I'm not going to stop there, obviously. The next point is, so how does a materialistic person get out of that trap? You're trapped either by the obsession or the desire, the money, sexuality, other temptations that consume us and completely blind us, as the Gemara says. A person doesn't sin unless there's a ruach shtus that blinds the person. Why? Because no healthy person would put their hand in fire. So if we're doing something that's damaging to our soul, it means we don't see clearly. Shtus. So this is what the whole Chassidus came to answer. Exactly this. To give us some type of fighting chance. Feeding our soul. I just saw a note from the Rebbe. Someone asked the Rebbe, how do I know what God wants of me? And the Rebbe says, God speaks directly to you through your soul. And from that arises good achlotas Teves. God speaks to us. It's our neshama. You have to let your soul speak to you. Now, a person's completely consumed by materialism, whatever it may be. So they basically think of it like this, the turbulence, the noise level. The volume is so high of the rush hour, you can't hear the kol d'mamadako, the subtle, gentle voice of beautiful music. So the first step is you have to lower the volume. You have to lower the volume of your materialistic life, which means create space, whether it's in the morning during davening, whether it's learning Chassidus once a day, whether it's another moment that you take during the day, you learn with someone else. You have to lower that volume. The more you lower that volume, the more your neshama can speak to you. Now, of course, you could ask the question, what about a person who doesn't want to do that? They're so materialistic, they don't want to do that. You know, there's a point, you can't help someone who doesn't want to help themselves. But if a person really wants, and even though life is difficult, the first step is to recognize that your soul speaks to you. First of all, it speaks to you through sometimes your sadness over the fact that you don't have sadness. And then it speaks to you through a sadness over the reality. And the more you see what light is like, the more you learn what Elikus is like, that's what he's saying, the more you'll also understand the lowliness of what you have. Many people feel, you know what, it's not so bad. Like the chassid that went into the basement when the days in Russia there was no air conditioning, there was no electricity, so they went into these cold basements, cellars under the ground to just get some relief on a very hot, scorching day. So a chassid goes down to the basement and he's so dark. So he says, so dark here, because there was also no light. And another person says, don't worry, you'll stay here, you'll get used to it. So he said, that's exactly what I'm worried about. I'm going to get used to it. The problem is we can convince ourselves that darkness is light and that everything is fine. Says the Baal Shem Tov, Haster Aster Panai. There's a darkness that conceals the fact that it's dark. So we need to expose ourselves to something that is bright. something that is illuminating. Chassidus gives us a taste of another reality. That doesn't mean you're suddenly in that reality. It just means now you have a taste. You see that, it should help you contrast what you have. So in the Maimon Teves, he speaks about that you meditate on loneliness. Sometimes it goes the other way around. You meditate on the greatness of Hashem, and you realize that what you have is temporary, impermanent, fleeting moments of pleasure, instant gratification. And that we're trading for eternity. That we're trading for something that is forever immortal. So is this a solution? No, but it's the beginning of the process. So that's how you have to find something that works for you, that you could say, here's my little oasis in the day where I focus on something that is ruchnistic. You may not be there right away, but you've at least given it some time. On Shabbos, we have more time for that. And the more you do this, the more you begin to see the contrast of a world that's literally inferior to Elokus. And if it's inferior, it usually starts invoking or evoking within you, eliciting a feeling of something that you want, something more superior than this material, hollow, empty world. But the kavanah is to transform this world. The kavanah is not to escape it. So that's the process that we have to go through. Okay. Let us now move to the next question. The next is going to be a few follow-ups. Okay. A few follow-up. Let's start with, I spoke about last week about the UN resolution and how it should be our attitude, that we have to realize that we are above it all. So someone wrote a follow-up, which I'd like to read and then comment on. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. I listened eagerly to your presentation on the latest MyLife edition. There were times during the Rebbe's Nesias where he emphasized that the Eibishter was conveying a message that the modern state of Israel does not constitute Ischalta de Geula, the beginning of the redemption. Initially, it was Bechesed u'Berachimim, meaning with compassion. My belief is that in response to this resolution, it should be stated publicly that it is the greatest repudiation yet of the notion of Ischalta de Geula, that Israel, the state of Israel, is the beginning of the Geula. If this were truly Reishis Smichus Gula Seina, if this wasn't truly the beginning of redemption, this should never have happened, which means the condemnation of the UN. With one Shev al Tas of the American administration, with one not vetoing of the American administration, Yerushalayim is suddenly no longer ours. That they have that power, so it should be clearly reveal that we're not dependent on them. It is my belief that this is one of the important messages that we must glean and share with others. The COVID. So yes, let me share with you the following. In addition to what I said last week, and I spoke about the understanding that our attitude is not dependent on UN resolutions. The Rebbe once wrote a letter to the Shazar, President Shazar of Israel, and he was complaining. He wrote to the Rebbe a letter that the Rebbe wrote to him and addressed the letter to the Nasi of, or not the Nasi, the president. I'm not sure whether the Rebbe didn't use the word Nasi, as we know from another letter, but he used an expression, and he said, of Eretz Yisrael, not Medinas Yisrael. So he writes to the Rebbe, why are you preventing me from being a chassid? Because I took an oath to the state of Israel, not to the land of Israel, to Medinas Yisrael. And by writing to me that way, you're depriving me from my connection, because I have to choose between being a chassid to what you're writing, to what I swore an oath to Israel. So the Rebbe writes back to him, it's a lengthy letter you can find. The Rebbe writes to him very interestingly. He says, firstly, you're older than I am, and you're a chassid long before I was around, so how could I deprive you from being a chassid that you're a chassid all the way back to the Alter Rebbe? Number two, the Rebbe says, on the contrary, Eretz Yisrael is far more encompassing and far greater than Medinas Yisrael, which began in 1948. We have a land here that belongs to us thousands of years. So Eretz Yisrael creates that you are a leader of a country that is here for thousands of years. It's much more powerful than just 1948. And if indeed the country, the land was given, the state was given to us by the UN, why can't they take it back, God forbid? So we have to know that Hashgacha Pratis, the Eibishter made that the country, nations of the world were also cooperating. But that's not what defines Eretz Yisrael. So therefore their resolutions, one way or the other, are simply immaterial, unnecessary, as the Rebbe told, immaterial and irrelevant, I should say, to the situation. As the Rebbe told Prime Minister Netanyahu when he was the Israeli representative in the UN, that it's a house of lies. Later he said it was a house of darkness. And a little light illuminates, which became evident. We don't have to be so nispoiled because our kiyum is not based on the nations of the world. If we were, we'd long have been not here anymore. Now, of course, we want their cooperation and we want their blessings and so on, but we shouldn't think of it in that way as if they control our destiny. As I discussed last week, and you could always look at the archives of all our episodes. They're also time-stamped on YouTube, which means you can find the subject. You don't have to listen to the whole hour. Find the subject you want. You could also download it as an MP3. All available. Go to meaningfullife.com/MyLife. You'll have instructions to do all that and all the proper and appropriate links. Okay. The next follow-up. The next follow-up is about the souls of tzaddikim. The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya Perek Aleph, I discussed last week, that basically it's quoting the Shari Kedusha of Rab Chaim Vital, who wrote down, there's basically the writings of the Arizal, Kisvei Arizal it's called, but Rab Chaim was the one that wrote it down, Shari Kedusha, that l'chol ish miYisrael, every Jew, echad tzaddik ve'echad rasham, has two nefoshes, and he goes on to explain the two nefoshes, nefesh habamis and nefesh halikis. So I discussed at length last week. That was the question, the Chassidus question. Discussed it. And one of the questions was then, is it say anywhere early Mekabolim right that only a tzaddik has a divine soul? I responded by saying, I don't know of anything like that, no source of such a nature. As a matter of fact, it goes against of much of which is written, especially when you take into account, a second. Apologize, just adjusting my mic. Especially when you take into account the fact that it says in the pasuk that every person is created b'tzelem Elokim, divine image, and the rayas that the Alter Rebbe brings. So it's very difficult to say that, to state that there's another opinion. So someone wrote the following as a follow-up, as a question. And the follow-up is, Chaim Miller's Practical Tanya says that there are other Mukabolim. And he says, Azuloi, that's Avram Azuloi in the Sefer Chesed Avram 3:25. The writer writes, but not sure the spot is right, maybe section 4. They say that only tzaddikim receive a chelik elokah. Who else are these authorities and what's for him? What do they then say makes someone a Jew? Is this such a chiddush that the Alter Rebbe makes, putting together a quote from Chaim Vital that also is not verbatim, if you check inside? Well, I looked up the Chesed Avram, actually quite surprised that there's such a thing, and I didn't find anything, not in 325, and not in 425, and not in any other 25 or 24 or 23. As a matter of fact, since I did study Chesed Avram in my younger years, I can tell you that the gist of it there is that Neshama is absolutely, Chesed Avram was a contemporary of the Ramak, the Rabbi Avraham Azulai, a Makubal, and he quotes the Arizal as well, and he doesn't go anywhere against, in any way says such a thing. As a matter of fact, you can say that he talks about Neshama there. He does say in 325 that tzaddikim in Eretz Yisrael, that tzaddikim chelik elikam emal. Fine, he uses that expression, but doesn't ever then negates and says that only they have a divine soul. So I'm not sure if there is such a source. I don't need to go defend the source that I don't know about. Even if there is, as we always know, the Psak Din is the Arizal's Psak Din, the Shari Kedusha of the Rachav, and the Alter Rebbe, of course, in Tanya. Even if you have to find, if you were to, so the whole question is based on the premise of someone saying that. Let's first find such a source and then we can discuss it. As I said, if anything, you look there, he talks about neshamas. Remember also that every morning in the davening, we say neshamas and asata b'tahirihi. Not only tzaddikim say that. Everyone says that. I don't know of any person on earth or ever in history that would say that only tzaddikim should say that prayer. Tahirihi, ata barasa, ata yitzarta, ata nefachta bi, ata meshamra b'kirbi. So it's true, we need a shmirah because it comes into asiyah. But as Alter Rebbe continues in that Perek Beis in Tanya, he explains, even though all the neshamas taka chelik elikam and malmamish, and they come from Chachmilah and they come from the Moyach Ha'av, how do we explain the difference of neshamas? So he explains, because they all originate from the Moyach, but they go through their gradations, through the worlds of Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah. But everyone has a neshama teherihi. And machshavtan she Yisrael kodma l'chol dover, and Yisrael v'kudsha b'richu kul achad. On and on and on, quotes from the Zohar, from Midrashim, and so on. So, Breshis b'shvil Yisrael b'shvil HaTeirah. So it's not that simple. If someone makes such a statement, we need to see it inside and see what the context is. Because it's not just a matter of an expression, it's a matter of understanding the content of the idea. So, let's go to the next question. Next follow-up was regarding, we talked about shidduchim, marriage. So here is what was asked. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, hi Rabbi Jacobson, I love your weekly shiurim and listen every week during my commute to work. Hashem should give you the strength to continue and grow in your holy work. I have a follow-up question regarding the Rebbe's advice that the sole criteria when searching for a spouse is that she be God-fearing. This is from 2 weeks ago, episode 143. It seems to me that possibly the Rebbe is coming from a viewpoint that any two Jews of the opposite gender can marry, assuming there's Meshichas Halev, meaning the heart, there's they're drawn to each other, and he is God-fearing. Am I correct that this is the Rebbe's position? And goes on to describe her own personal life, and then concludes, I'm finding it a hard time to understand the Rebbe's advice. Of course, being frum and God-fearing are essential to any frum marriage, and without that, a marriage becomes untenable. In that regard, it is the foundation. But there is so much more to marriage than just that, and I find it hard to understand the relevance of the Rebbe's advice in this matter. Can you please shed some more light on it? Thank you. Well, I will repeat what I said then, maybe a little more embellishment. Everything in life has a foundation. You took a look at a building, you have a foundation of the building, a yesod, and you have the floors above. Nobody lives in the foundation. Most of us don't ever see the foundation. But no building can exist without a foundation. And then you have floors. You have floor 1, you have floor 2, you have floor 3, or many floors. Each floor has specific rooms. Each room has its furniture, has its unique to it. There's a kitchen, there's a dining room, there's a living room, there's a bedroom, and so on. There are different rooms. Each room has its... Will you say that any one of those rooms are indispensable? Some are more important than others. Foundation is indispensable. So let's look at marriage the same way. Binyan adayad, it's a binyan, an eternal edifice. You want to build an eternal edifice, not just a regular edifice, an eternal. And what do we say? Al Yisodei HaTorah VaMitzvos, on the foundations of Torah mitzvahs. I'm Pasha Medayik in the Rebbe's letter that he wrote to every chas and kal for their wedding. Kefi shemorim, how they're illuminated by Moyer Shabbatera Zui Primis HaTorah, the inner. What are you seeing here? You're trying to build a foundation of a building. A building, you want to have a foundation that's solid, that's unwavering. The unwavering element in a marriage that survives everything, all the floors and all the furniture and all the rooms, is Yiras Hashem. That's how it is. That is the foundation. Is that enough? No one lives on a foundation. Obviously, apitera, you have to be attracted to the person that you're marrying. Apitera, there has to be compatibility in the level of communication, compatibility in interests and so on. But the foundation that's unwavering, uncompromising, that you want to know guaranteed, for sure, is the Ikar of Ikrim, is the Yiras Hashem. In simple English means that the other person is not arrogant and they know that God is more important than them. You tell me a marriage that has both parties feeling that way, they will be able to deal with any challenge. Now, of course, we all are human beings, we have our flaws, and sometimes we make mistakes. But if that's the driving force, Yiras Hashem, Hitisalo, you know then you have a guaranteed successful. Then the Rebbe says, you also need Chen and Yefi. Hevla, Sheker HaChem, Hevla Yefi is when you don't have the issue Yiras Hashem. That's like having floors of a building that are beautiful, or the surface level, the paint is nice, the makeup is nice, but you cut a little beneath the surface and there's nothing there. So that's where you have to look at the priorities. Is it possible that any two people can marry? No, God made that. We have a motive that says that Machrizin, they announce 40 days before the child is formed, that before the child is born, that there'll be this person, Ben Pleni to Bas Pleni, and so on. This person will marry this person. Mezabish's Mezavik Zevugim, we're told. He's the one that makes matches. If everyone can marry everyone, why does the Abish have to do it? So obviously there's compatibility, there's certain interests that are, and there's certain things that are very important. But unfortunately today we live in a world where most people focus on things that are completely not important, or optional, definitely not foundational. So the question is how you focus. And obviously it's more than just Yiras Hashem is the only thing, but the Yiras Hashem is the foundational element. And with Yiras Hashem you can grow. People are flexible, yielding, they can learn new things. So even if your spouse doesn't have everything you want them to have, if they have that type of bittul, they'll be open to things. They'll be open to try new things. They'll be open to learn things. That's the key point in understanding all of this. Okay. There were some other questions related to marriage, which, because of time, I will push to the next weeks. So the next thing I'm going to do is going to focus on the Chassidus question and then the essays. Here's the Chassidus question. Can you please elaborate on the oft-discussed concept in Chassidus, Akudim, Nikudim, and Brudim? How can they be applied to our lives today? So Akudim, Nikudim, Brudim, let's begin, is a reference in the Pasuk in Parsha Vayetze, where Yaakov is tending to the sheep of Lavan. We spent 20 years doing that. With that, he earned his right to Leah and then Rachel. In that order, technically, even though he wanted it the other way. So that pasuk says that Yaakov, I'm looking at the Eitz Chaim, and I'll quote that in a moment, that Yaakov, that Yaakov in his dream, V'hinei ha'asudim ha'elim alatzein akudim nekudim evrudim. The sheep that were breeding, he was breeding the sheep with the maklis of the different colors to get them to breed. So it says they were akudim, nekudim, uvrudim. Rashi and the commentaries explain 3 types of sheep: spotted, striped, and many different spots. Or some say a combination of spots and stripes, or long stripes. So like anything in Torah, we know that Torah is above all, stakal baraisa bar alma. The Torah is the blueprint to which God created existence. The Torah is it speaks about things above and hints to things below. So what is the meaning of these sheep? What relevance does it have? So there's a famous sikha from the Rebbe on the actual meaning of sheep that they refer to Kabbalah Sale, and the idea that that's why we say Roya Tzain. Moshe was a Roya Tzain. He was a shepherd of sheep. The flock is the nation. So Tzain has many different symbolisms. But the Akudim, Nikudim, Brudim is explained the first time in Eitz Chaim. I'm reading to you from Shara Akudim, Perek Aleph. Shara Akudim means the gate of Akudim, Perek Aleph. And it brings the pasuk. He's saying Ksiva Eira b'chol. It's saying Akudim, Nikudim, Brudim. V'gam ksiv kira isi es kol asher loven oselacha. U'b'parsha zu romuz. In this chapter is hinted. Kol b'chinas elu she'onu medabrim b'kam. All the levels we are speaking about here in Eitz Chaim. Ki Lavan who said Levin Elyon. Lavan, the sheep were Lavan. Lavan, obviously there's the wicked Lavan, but there's Lu'umazeh and Kedusha Levin Elyon, which means the supernal whiteness, is the highest level in Shtalshlus. Pure white. Pure, innocent, pure white. Asher hu, Kedim Kol Atzilus. That Levin Elyon is higher than all of Atzilus. Hazeh. V'hu ha'esa kol elu abchinas. And he, meaning Levin Elyon, that's higher than Atzilus, this Atzilus that we're discussing, Atzilus means the emanation of divine energy. He creates all these levels, Akudim, Nikudim, Brudim, Letzedach HaAtzilus, for the purpose of Atzilus, Sheyaitz Lachreim, that will be emanated, will be imparted or emanated afterwards, Asher Hu Nikra B'Shem Yaakov. That's called Yaakov, Atzilus. The Hischil Be'Akudim, and then he goes on to explain each one of them. So Chassidus explains this. What are these 3 levels of Akudim, Nikudim, Brudim that are so-called prepare existence for Atzilus? So let's first explain what Atzilus is, and then we'll explain these 3 worlds. Atzilus, as you may know in simple English, is a world of unity. It is where the vision of God for existence is fully clear, absolutely clear. So Atzilus, in simple words, means God imparted, emanated, Vatzalti min haruach from Moshe Rabbeinu, Parsha Ba'alescha, emanated divine energies, Chachma, Bina, Das, so on. And they are all, as the Zohar says, they're all united. They're a divine expression. There's nothing but the divine instrument. They're nothing but divine instruments. In Bria, they already begin to take on a certain substance and certain identity. In Yetzirah, they take on shape. And in Asiyah, they take on a full dimensional. Sometimes a good way to explain it is that Atzilus is like the vision of an idea. It's all there in one vision. Bria is the outline, the framework, the skeleton. Yetzirah is when you flesh it out and break it into details. It's tzura, you give it shape and form. And Asiyah is the final product, which is aligned with the vision of Atzilus. So in Asiyah, we live in a world today. Are we aligned with our purpose? No, that's why we're not Atzilus people. Atzilus is also sometimes called tikkun for that reason, because it's the world of repair, where it repairs the shattered or fragmented containers and vessels from Toyu. So how do you prepare for Atzilus? How do you create a world that is so balanced that the Eris and Kalim, the energies in the containers, so-called the vision, is aligned with every ingredient and every one of the building blocks that will define existence? So you have three-step process: Akudim, Nikudim, Brudim. You look in Sefer Akudim of the Tzemach Tzedek, where it gathers together different Maimorim. You'll see a Maimor from Vayetze, from Noach, and so on. Briefly, it goes like this. Akudim means one spot. Akud means bound. 10 energies in one container. Nikudim means many points. 10 energies in 10 containers. Sometimes the world of Teyu. It's referred to the world of Teyu. And Brudim is Hiskalalus, where you have 10 energies in 10 containers, but they're balanced. Instead of being 10 energies in 10 containers, the energies are too intense for the containers. Now, when you think about it, let's talk for a moment an example. When a child is conceived, an egg is fertilized by the seed, what happens? And it's conceived, and God blesses it with conception, and a soul enters the beginnings. What happens is, at the beginning, you'll have one cell. Everything is in that one cell. The whole fetus, the whole child, one cell. All energies in one container, a very tiny container. Then the cells begin to break apart, split. It's still not a full-shaped child, but they become Nikudim. And then comes Brudim, because Nikudim is still the energy of the conception, the energy level of the spirit is still strong. The containers are very weak. They're very fragile at that point. And then as the fetus continues to develop, it will become a full-bodied child, which will mean with a head and a heart and the different parts in the bodies, the top part, the chest, the torso, the legs. They develop each in their own stage. So it all begins with a concentrated seed, like a nucleus, akudim. Then it develops, and then as the cells split, and then it becomes a full-dimensional thing. Interestingly, akudim, nikudim, vrudim are sometimes referred to bria, yetzirah, and asiyah, the klolos. Bria being akudim, which sometimes is also called ak. Sometimes ak is considered higher than akudim. Nikudim is, in that case, yetzirah, and when akudim is bria, and asiyah, the klolos, meaning a macrocosm, is atzilus. That I'll leave for another time. I've spoken about that, but just to add to the picture. Sometimes it says that bria the klolos is ak, akudim and nikudim. Ak is the bria the klolos. Akudim nikudim is yitzirah the klolos, and vrudim, which is atzilus tikkun, is asiyah the klolos. Now, what it means in personal life, it means everything that begins in life, or doesn't begin just suddenly you see a full picture. Everything begins a concentrated form, where everything there is all aligned, but it's still one container. It's very, very concentrated. Then you break it into parts, which is nikudim, and then it comes into a full-bodied atzilus, where you have the perfect balance and harmony necessary to create the divine reality called atzilus. So this is a brief explanation, and with that we will move on to the life essays, my life essays. So as always, we'll do 3 essays. Essay number 1 is Listen to Her Voice, by Rishi Groner, 31 years old, strategist and AMP writer, self-employed, Brooklyn, New York. Very beautiful essay. I commend you for that. Essentially talking about the feminine voice. People search for spiritual solutions to practical problems, starting within our own relationships, friendships, co-workers, significant others. As traditional gender roles fluctuate and cause strain on relationships, as workplaces challenged typical leadership structures, how can the notion of gender be understood to ease communication and collaboration between the sexes? So it goes on to speak about the struggle to reconcile masculine and feminine, and using Chassidus, the moon and the sun, and the whole idea of Nekeva to save of Gover, what will happen before Mashiach. I find this essay to be excellent. I must say, excellent essay in understanding how we can shift our consciousness and deal and allow the empowerment of the feminine voice and how that can transform the world. So I definitely recommend reading it, meaningfullife.com/mylife/essays-2016. You'll read this essay and other essays, as well as by subscribing to our weekly newsletter. She concludes, contemporary feminism seeks to eradicate women's roles, designated equal opportunities, and ensuring equal pay, a noble and important task in today's society. However, Chassidus moves us one level beyond. This indicates the importance of acknowledging the true stature of feminine roles, whether inhabited by men or women, for each being contains elements of both within their souls. Teachers, writers, communicators, and nurturers should be awarded accordingly by society, and in those areas where women excel, they should be granted the platform to do so as writers, teachers, judges, or mentors. The second essay, which we'll deal with, is Changed for Good by Levi Yitzchak Cantor, 29 years old, JOS teacher, Be'er Sheva, Israel. This one is, in this essay I will attempt to explain how, contrary to typical behavior of intimidating ourselves and others into doing what's right, if we want to achieve positive results within ourselves and within others, we must make sure that it's done out of real free choice. Only then can we really achieve long-lasting and even permanent results. This essay is based on many sources of Chassidus, but the themes here can be mainly found in Maimer Leitia Mishakela and Tikva Chedesh from Hemshech Samach Vov. Also a well-done essay, and talks about the idea of the need to have Ava. Av in Yiri talks about love and discipline, but the main focus on giving as an end in itself is the fundamental principle that drives a person. And finally, essay number 3, Happy Unconditionally by Chesky Raskin, 16 years old, Brooklyn, New York, and basically talks about the power of simcha and joy with a few personal stories, nicely done, especially considering the age, and all about the power of simcha and positivity, and speaks about in personal terms how it affects his life. So with that, we conclude this week's episode 145, and as I started out at the outset, may it be a blessed month and a blessed year, and may we take these days and transform anything, even the tinge of negativity. You should have none of that, but any tinge of it into true holidays and celebration. Every week we are here, Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. MyLife Chassidus applied. Everyone be well.